Hi YouTube world, it's Dr. Karina again. Last time I looked on the channel, I had up to 20 subscribers, which feels amazing. Thank you for everyone who subscribed. Each video had over 200 views, so that really meant a lot to me. Today, we continue with the importance of mental health in entertainers, artists, creatives, and really these tips can be used for anyone. Today, we'll be working on, or rather looking at interpersonal effectiveness. And to give a quick definition right away, interpersonal effectiveness relates to the skills which help us to attend to relationships, balance priorities versus demands, build a sense of self-respect, and achieve our goals that involve others. So there's a lot to unpack there. Interpersonal effectiveness will be useful as we start to encounter more people again, safely of course, with masks and social distancing when necessary. Oh, and don't forget to wash your hands. I just had to put that in there. So the definition that I just gave you for interpersonal effectiveness includes a lot in it. So obviously you are trying to maintain your relationships with this skill. So maybe you have an art gallery and you have a business partner and you guys have had some disagreements. Interpersonal effectiveness skills, as described in DBT, which I mentioned in the last video, it can be very effective. Or maybe you have a fitness coach or a dance coach, an acting coach who you've always gotten along really well, have a great foundation with, and then they make a choice or suggest something that you might not agree with. These skills that we'll go over today can really help. And of course, they can be useful in close friendships, in your relationship with your significant other, with your parents, with your siblings. Interpersonal effectiveness is one of the 4 cornerstones of DBT, which I briefly mentioned last video, dialectical behavioral therapy as put forth by Dr. Marsha Linehan. We'll probably have a separate video on Dr. Linehan not too far in the future. So interpersonal effectiveness is one cornerstone. Part of the definition of interpersonal effectiveness is figuring out the balance between priorities and demands. So we all have demands on our time, whether that relates to work or school or family or children. There are also priorities that sometimes may be demands, but sometimes are not. Self-care can be a priority. Sometimes that goes to the wayside. Another priority could be your art, dance, music, film work, writing, whatever that may be. That's just one of the parts of interpersonal effectiveness where the skills allow you to balance those priorities and demands. Another part of the definition that is pretty important is the part that talks about sort of maintaining and achieving self-respect. With interpersonal effectiveness, you can come off as effective and true to the other person. More specifically, you end up expressing your truth and being more honest and truthful and in line with your own values. That's where that kind of self-respect definition comes from with interpersonal effectiveness of this therapy. Distress tolerance is the other cornerstone that we covered in the last video. The third is mindfulness. There's been a lot of studies, videos, articles, books about mindfulness. So we may get to this practice of staying in the moment, staying present, but it may be later on. The fourth cornerstone is mood regulation, and that's one that we'll definitely cover in the future. So, without further ado, let's look at some myths that we may have about how to be effective interpersonally. So, one common one is, I can't stand if someone gets upset with me. Well, you can stand it. It's just difficult. A lot of people talk about having issues confronting others, for instance. That's something that you hear often. But it certainly helps to reframe a conversation that you have to have with someone as something other than a confrontation. It's really about sharing your own needs and your own wants. Another myth, if they say no, it will kill me. It's very hard to hear no from another person, especially if you're putting forth your needs and your wants. And so that's very understandable, very human. But no, hearing no from someone will not actually destroy you. You will be able to move forward. Another myth is, and this one might be more subconscious for a lot of us, I don't deserve to get what I want or need. And so sometimes I have a fear of failure. That's a common term that's used. Or we may feel in some way that we're not good enough to get what we want or need. So using these communication skills with others allows you to see how to be effective in getting what you want, provided it's not hurting anyone else. And the skills just help you see that you can achieve things that you want if you can verbalize them, if you can express them. Another myth is, if I make a request, this will show that I'm a very weak person. And I think this is pretty common. In this day and age, you might see people walking around in spaces that may get more populated as we kind of start to reopen throughout the country. You might start seeing people not wearing masks, for instance, when they should, or not maintaining a safe distance. And you may not want to request that person to follow the current guidelines because you don't want to be seen as needy or weak, or a complainer, right? It's hard for people in our society to ask things of others because of certain negative connotations that go with that. Another myth, I must be really inadequate if I can't fix this myself. A lot of us are very independent, self-reliant. I have to give a shout out to my girls and women and people who identify as girls and women, because oftentimes women, have to do a lot. In addition to work and taking care of kids, they may put on parties for their friends, organize outings, cook. And there's a lot in our culture that kind of expects women to be able to handle it all. And if you ask for help, there's some kind of negative association there. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not forgetting about the guys out there. But this is definitely a part of our society. I mean, certainly boys and men and people who identify as boys and men are also taught to be very self-reliant. What about the common thing of guys not asking for directions, fix a flat tire, or I think this is kind of a common one, like expecting guys to just know how to fix things around the house. It's definitely hard for a lot of the independent and self-reliant people out there to ask for help. Oftentimes we expect that we should be able to do things for ourselves without making any requests. Another myth is, I have to know whether a person is going to say yes before making a request. Oftentimes we end up sort of having this internal battle if we have to have a serious conversation with someone. We kind of wonder if they will agree to do as we ask. Putting others' needs in front of our own goes a long way back, right? We're all social creatures doing what's important for the group. versus the individual is usually emphasized in a lot of different ways. And so it's hard to not go that extra mile or not try to be as helpful as possible to others. That is if you have empathy, compassion. Sociopaths, those with antisocial personality disorder may not have that empathy or compassion, but that's a whole other topic for another video. Anyway, these are some of the myths that we have when it comes to communication with others, these interpersonal effectiveness myths. And if you're kind of wondering how those myths came together, they were actually a part of the workbook that Dr. Linehan created for the Interpersonal Effectiveness Cornerstone. So now we're gonna move into the acronyms that I wanted to go over today. This is the part where we put into action the interpersonal effectiveness skills. I did an acronym in my last video on distress tolerance that was called IMPROVE. And please, by all means, refer back to that video. But today, the acronyms we are working on are Dear Man and Give Fast. Dear Man, Give Fast. Before your minds go anywhere else, we'll go ahead and break these down. The first acronym, Dear Man, is more about what actions you can take while speaking with someone about something that's important to you that perhaps you would like done. And Give Fast, the other acronym, refers more to how to relate to the other person in general during the conversation. So we'll start with the first word, dear, and the first letter, D, stands for describe the current situation to the person. For instance, let's say your partner's been coming home later than usual, and it's been happening a lot, and they're not really giving you an explanation of what's going on. Describing the situation is kind of the first part, assuming, of course, that the person you're speaking with has already agreed to have a conversation with you. It really should be done somewhere where it's kind of just the two of you, or the small group of you that are involved in the conversation, at some point where everyone is not feeling hurried or rushed, and just where you can set aside some time to have the conversation. You would D, describe the situation. E, express your feelings and opinions. Now, many of you have probably heard about the I statements, and so it's really good when you're expressing your feelings and your opinions to use those phrases. So, for instance, I'm hurt when you get home late, and I feel cast aside when I don't get a phone call from you, letting me know that you're gonna be late. Okay, so that's describing the situation and expressing how you're feeling. The A is assert yourself by asking for what you want. And so you basically are already doing that by describing the situation, expressing how you're feeling. But when you're asserting yourself by asking for what you want, ultimately you would add to the previous example of your partner coming home late, I would like a phone call if you're gonna be late. If you get home late, I'd appreciate if you would take out the trash or do the dishes or put the kids to bed. So anything like that, where you're continuing to use I statements. And then finally, so we have DEA, R, you reinforce the person ahead of time by giving positive consequences. So when you reinforce the person ahead of time, you kind of give them a reason or a positive consequence as to why they should maybe do what you're asking. So in keeping with this example of the partner getting home late, you could say, if you call me ahead of time, I'll make sure whatever I cooked stays warm for you. If you get home early more often, we can watch more of that show together that we like. It's really great to combine a request with something positive that can come from that request being fulfilled, okay? In this acronym, we describe the situation to the person, express our thoughts, feelings, opinions, assert what our needs are, and reinforce to the other person what good things can come from going along with our request. The second part of our acronym is MAN, and M stands for be mindful of what your goals are. Keep in mind what your objective is when you're having this conversation. What is it that you ultimately want? You know, we hear, what is your objective, a lot in the acting world. And I've certainly heard that a lot. Shout out to my coach, Dean West. So the objective is really what you want to get back to when you're having this conversation and using these skills. So let's think of another example. Let's say, like I mentioned earlier, you may have a fitness coach, a dance coach, an ice skating coach. My mind is obviously on coaching tonight. Let's say the way you're being taught something in your chosen field, in your chosen hobby, in your chosen art form. Let's say that it's not being taught as effectively. Maybe you have an instructor that yells at you or puts you down a lot. It could help to be mindful of what you're trying to achieve. If you like the person you're working with, you may want to keep working with them. You may want to be able to learn faster. So these are some goals that you want to be mindful of when you're talking with the person. Sort of skipping back for a second to the R and DEAR for reinforcing. You can always reinforce to that instructor, that person in your life, that by better meeting your needs, you'll be able to spend more time on whatever craft it is. Now the A in MAN is appear confident and effective. You'll notice that I use the word effective a lot, and that's because in this therapy and dialectical behavioral therapy, a lot of these skills are meant to help you have a more effective life. Appearing confident is really important. You don't want to come off as arrogant or kind of dismissing the other person's point of view. Appearing confident is in some ways a psychological trick to get what you'd like from the other person. If you seem calm and collected and confident, the other person will be more likely to believe what you're saying, hear you out. That confidence will help them show that you're serious about what you're requesting. And then the N in MAN is negotiate. So I brought this up briefly earlier in the video. But if you negotiate willingly with the other person, then you have a higher chance of getting what it is that you're asking for from that other person. Plus, both of you can get something from the conversation. Kind of going back to this coaching example, it kind of works both ways, right? Like, okay, I'll spend more time on these specific movements if you can talk to me in a way that is more conducive to my learning, you know, something like that. So negotiating, right? And this is important in so many contexts. You know, at home, you can ask your spouse to vacuum, which is your least favorite task, and then you'll do the dishes, which is their least favorite task. Okay, so that is the second word in our acronym, MAN, and again, that's for staying mindful of what your goals are in the conversation, acting confident, and appearing effective, and finally negotiating. I cannot stress that one enough. Okay, so we went over Dear Man, which is kind of how you should present the conversation or the request to the person. Now we're going to look at Give Fast. And so the next word, give, in this acronym, focuses more on how to respond to what the other person is saying. The G is for gentle. So try to use a gentle manner when you're bringing forth something that you want to ask of the other person. So that's why the I statements that I brought up before can be really helpful, because if you use a manner where you end up kind of blaming the other person or telling them why they're wrong or why they're a bad person for not wanting to do something you want them to do, they are most likely going to get very defensive and kind of close up, and certainly they would not be in a mental space where they would want to fulfill your request. So having that gentle, easy manner where you put forth your thoughts and feelings and then be willing to hear their thoughts and feelings, that really is the best approach. And then the I in give is interested. So act interested, listen, don't interrupt. Hopefully they have allowed you to express what you wanted to say, and then you give them the floor, you give them the chance to do the same. Again, this is something I can relate back to acting. It's very common in the beginning, and I know this from personal experience. You've learned your lines for a scene, and then you like the points where you get to speak, right? It's something you've been working on. But then the other person, when it's their turn in the scene, you might not be listening to them. You might be waiting for your turn to start speaking again. So, and that's also very common in real life, right? You may get your point across, but then you just tune out what the other person is saying, and it can be very noticeable to the other person. Most people can tell if you're not really tuning into what they're saying. And if they see that you're not listening or not open to what they're saying, it's unlikely that the request or the conversation will go in your favor. Now, the V in give, validate. I love this one. Validation is so important. Validating the other person's perspective. This is a big one because I really can't stress how useful and how effective validation is, okay? So let's say you're having a fight with a friend and they might have told a secret, let's say just a small secret that you shared with them, and let's say they shared that with another mutual friend, and you didn't want that other friend to know about the secret. So you've used effective communication skills to explain why what your first friend did upset you, and they heard you out. And then let's say their response is, well, I was trying to get closer to this other person and I did make a mistake by telling them your secret, but I really was just trying to get closer to them and kind of speed up the intimacy in our friendship. So it's really important in this kind of situation to validate the person's actions, okay? Or rather, validate the person's reasons for their actions. It doesn't excuse what they did, not at all. That's why you're having this conversation, but it's important to see what the motivation was for the person and to validate that. You know, we all want to be seen as good, fair, honest people. And so when you validate another person, even if you're having a serious conversation about something, when you validate them, you show them that you're not upset with them as a whole. You don't hate them. It's more that you didn't like something that they may have done or not done. And so validating kind of says, like, I see you, I know that you're a good person, I value you. Both start with V, validate and value. And so basically validating allows you to show that you value the other person, even though they may have done something you don't agree with. And finally, the E in give stands for easy manner. Kind of going back to the G in this acronym, a gentle approach. You know, having an easy manner is important because you don't want the conversation to get too heated, too intense. I mean, it might for the other person, but if used appropriately, you can even sometimes inject a little bit of humor into the conversation. Now, the reason I say a little bit, is because, for instance, you don't want to make a joke of the other person's feelings when they're expressing them, or, you know, laugh while they're expressing, you know, their perspective. Having that easy manner, being a little, I would even say, irreverent. In DBT, that simply means kind of take a serious situation and make it less so, make it a little bit tongue-in-cheek, okay? So you don't want it to be sarcastic, that's not where we're going with this, but getting back to that friend example, let's say the secret that was shared about you is that, I don't know, let's be silly, you don't wear underwear, okay? Make it maybe a little funny by poking fun at yourself, not at the other person, you know, just being like, well, maybe I should start putting on some underwear, you know, I don't know. Just something to lighten the mood, right? Because also, the less intense the conversation is, the less heavy it is, the more likely you might get what you're asking for. Okay, so that is our GIVE acronym. Again, gentle approach, be interested in what the other person is saying, validate, 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 over-validate what they're saying. And finally, easy manner. You know, try a little humor if appropriate at times. And finally, the second word in Give Fast, this acronym starts with F for fair. So make sure to be fair to yourself and the other person. What I think of when I think of being fair to yourself, don't belittle your own request. Don't back down if you're getting a little resistant. Being fair to the other person kind of goes back to hearing them out, making a request that you think is possible with their abilities, with their time. That fairness injects like the dignity, grace into the conversation and makes it more palatable for both of you. So fairness is important. You know, fighting fair. It helps to preserve all kinds of relationships. The A in Give Fast stands for apologies. Apologies are to be used sparingly when you're expressing your feelings, making a request. Certainly you want to apologize if you've hurt the person or offended them in some way, or you know, you may want to apologize if you were defensive earlier in the conversation or earlier in time, but don't over apologize. Don't apologize for expressing your feelings. Don't apologize for making a request. Don't apologize for disagreeing with the person. Just don't over apologize and, you know, apologize for living, you know. I think that in a lot of ways this also relates to my ladies. In our culture, a lot of times women feel compelled to say I'm sorry, you know, whether it's speaking up in a meeting or feeling like their request is over the top. Sorry is one that's really ingrained in our culture, especially for women. You know, and I'm sure a lot of you know exactly what I'm talking about. The S in FAST stands for stick to your values, okay? This can all feel pretty daunting when you first start to practice it, but just remember what your values are, and those may be honesty, being on time, being competent in your work. You know, a value could even be being a perfectionist. I mean, it may not always be the most healthy thing, but you just have to figure out what is most important to you. Other values include compassion, thoughtfulness. You know, these are all things that could be important to you. And so when you're having a conversation with someone where you explain your feelings, where you're asking for something, just remember to stick to what's important to you. In other words, don't sell out. If the other person says, well, it's not important to me, you know, to be on time for our meetings, reiterate how it's important to you that someone be timely or why it's important. Give them that positive consequence of what would happen if they did as you ask, as mentioned earlier in the DEAR part of the acronym. So, you know, you could say, being on time is really important to me. It's something that I'm committed to. And if you're able to be on time 3 days out of the week to our meetings, you'll get here in time for the coffee and donuts, which tend to be gone by the time you get here. or if you can show up 3 times in a row on time, I'll make sure the meetings are much shorter. So in that way, you can stick to your values, but still communicate to the person in a way that will make it favorable that they might go ahead and agree to what you're asking. Finally, we're in the home stretch. The T in FAST stands for truthful. So I've kind of been throwing around honesty and truth throughout the video, but it's really important to be honest with the person. Sometimes we may be tempted to exaggerate, to make excuses, sometimes even act helpless to facilitate someone agreeing to something. But if you remain truthful to the other person and also to yourself, it makes the whole thing feel better, makes the conversation go better, and kind of goes back to sticking to your values. It kind of allows you to maintain that self-respect that is in the original definition of interpersonal effectiveness. So those are our acronyms, Dear Man and Give Fast, and hopefully you guys can try to use these in your everyday lives. And tell me how it goes in the comment section. Let me know if you found any other skills, better skills. If you like what you've seen here today, please like and subscribe. I think I got 1 extra subscriber while I've been making this video, so thank you so much. Well, this is Dr. Karina signing off. Oh, and don't forget to wash your hands.